Really. We've got two amazing poets on stage this afternoon, and I'm going to let the chair of the session introduce them properly. But I have to say a very, very special welcome first to Danielle Boodoo-Fortuné, sitting next to me, who, as you all know, is the poetry winner of the 2019 OCM Bocas Prize. And as you can probably tell just by looking at her, about to have her second child. So we are totally grateful that despite this, when she could be, she could be sort of lying in bed and refusing to do anything, that she's come here to read poems and talk about poetry with us. Next to her is Nick Makoha, British poet, born in Uganda, or maybe he's not a British poet, maybe he's a British Ugandan or Ugandan British, or an ish. I'm doing well. We have lots of people who straddle borders and boundaries and identities at this year's festival, and Nick is certainly one of them. We're grateful to the British Council for making it possible for him to be here. He's the author of the book Kingdom of Gravity, which was shortlisted for the Best First Book Prize and the Forward Prizes for Poetry 2 years ago. They're both, incidentally, People Tree Press poets, and so People Tree Press is in the audience. I think we should applaud them as well. And leading this conversation will be Ayanna Gilian Lloyd in red at the far end, fiction writer, an extremely exciting Trinidadian writer whose first novel, which is going to be called The Gatekeepers, we're eagerly awaiting. We're very much planning to launch it at the festival one of these years, and hopefully not too many years in the future. So everyone, please welcome the writers. We'll get the session started.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thanks to everyone for being here. And thank you again to Danielle and Nick. I'm looking forward to chatting with you both. I'm going to just apologize for doing this on my phone because I can't even read my own handwriting. I did make some notes, but really it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I wrote. So I'm going to be using my phone for my notes for this. I'm not going to do too many introductions. One, because Danielle is no stranger to Bocas, and now neither is Nick, and I think Nicholas sort of covered quite a bit of the introductions, and there may be a couple of things that I'd mention about their work by way of introduction as the conversation sort of goes along. So what I'm going to ask both writers, just to give you a sense of how the session is going to run, they're both going to read for about 10 minutes, then we'll chat and questions, and if we have time, maybe one short poem at the end to sort of round things off. So, Danielle, would you like to start? You can sit, you can stand, totally up to you.
It's a good vibe, so I'll
good vibe to sit.
To enter my mother's house. The heron God created daughter on the last day. Not knowing what to do with the longing left over from creation, he poured it into her open mouth, still warm and echoing with earth. To enter my mother's house, I must walk backward with smoke in my mouth. To pass through the keyhole, I must become a spout of water, a single hair from an ocelot's back. I must go back 30 years to recreate myself, carve my face on the unburnt tip of a match, strike my teeth thrice against her name. The daughter is always hungry, walking backward through locked doors, breaking her teeth on teacups and unasked questions. In my mother's house, blue as bruise and dry as tinder, there are rooms I am too tall to enter. I must make myself small and light as a bee, suspend myself among the dust motes and droplets, hum and fidget among the noiseless things. I must not disturb the dishes in the sink, tread softly around the sunken bed. If the daughter, milk soft and heavy with egg, does not re-enter the house of her mother, she will give birth to a siege of night herons. They will be born ravenous, eat the heart from her body before they can walk. To re-enter my mother's house, I must walk backward cloaked in purple, the color of hurt. I must never ask about my birth. Doe. The hunter remembers the doe. You see, her eyes spoke, but I didn't listen. It happened like this. The dogs leapt, seized her by the throat. I pulled the trigger, turned her face into the damp earth so I wouldn't see her eyes while I did my work. But once I drew the blade against her side, I knew. It was still warm, breathing deep inside the half moon of her open belly. Leave it, someone said, but I couldn't. I feared the darkness would swallow me, that the sighing trees would remember my face. It blinked twice beneath its coil of wet silk, looked right into my blindness with eyes that spoke the same language as its mother's. The hunter's wife remembers the fawn. When he brought me the fawn that Sunday evening, its weight in my arms felt somehow like prayer. Its eyes were like yours, difficult, hungry, heavy with the memory of its mother's ruined body. But the truth is, it was you who broke my heart that night, you with your small hands made for holding on too long. You didn't even make a sound when, startled by its aloneness, the fawn thrashed and split its skull on the kitchen floor. The hunter's only daughter hears the fawn song. There is music in the forest, a word I heard the bush tell. It is a single sound, a song for the barefoot and the aching of heart. They say once you hear it, you shed your old tongue and learn to speak in the soft whoop of the lonely. They say once you hear it, you lay yourself down beneath the trees, and the fawn is the one walking home in your skin. Portrait of my father as a grouper. The weight is too much to carry, even underwater. You lie in a bed of silt and algae. Wait for the Lord of sunken things to call your name and raise you home. When I come to see you, I forget how to breathe. There is ash on your forehead, your silver mouth cracked with thirst and too much salt. Here is no place for the living. In the cot beside you lies a hollowed eel, still sparking faintly with the charge of what was. Barred windows keep out an unchanging sea, but all the doors here are broken. You say there have been gunshots in the ward next door, that the drowning cry out at night for mercy, young men caught between teeth, old men tangled in nets. I show you photos of what my life looks like. I have chosen only the bright things, left out the spiny years of pain. Oh, Father, look at the face you have given me to live with. You have pulled our lives, soft and impermanent as polyps, into your crushing mouth. But as you once were, I am a fish unwilling to drown. So I sit at your undersea bedside as you pray, and I wait, boning knife clutched in hands in case your God does not come.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you.
Over to Nick.
Good afternoon, everybody. You can be louder than that. You're in Trinidad. Yeah, carnival's not over. Okay. All right, so there is a flyer at the back. I don't know if everyone's got a copy. There's a a card here that should have one of the poems. If the people who will help us could kind of give that out, I'll read that towards the end. But otherwise, I'll start with this one. This poem is called The Dark. Just to amuse me, if you could close your eyes while I read this poem, I would appreciate that. If your eyes are still open, you will notice that you can see me. So your eyes are not open, should be closed for this one, The Dark.
Should I keep my eyes open so I could like make sure?
Yeah, you watch them, you watch them, you know? All right, here we go. The Dark. You will try to make sense of the terrain, its limits on reality, its secondary sounds, the crickets speaking pure rhetoric. What is the year? No matter. Stripped of remembrance, isn't the darkness a grave? An axis by which all are measured? The final mountain? Blessed are the dead, whose bodies are buried in the bosom of the earth. Blessed are those who no longer taste fury, who when brought to silence make dust their paper. In these hours of damp, our sky will witness bombs hollow out our city. Be vigilant. Choose your execution as well. Do not talk of wills. Bless the pavements that will become your burial grounds. For what can we give except our bodies? Those who were your children will make homes in doorways. Cover your heads. Our patriarchs have been ripped off the wall. It is not the dark, but what it leaves behind. A servant girl on her knees gives testimony that our king has been added to our days dead. Lose respect, lose ceremony, lose duty, lose circumstantial evidence, lose the code. My father should not have died today. Lose the law, lose remembering, lose absence. In the absence of the law, the truth will not be written down. Lose those who break it, cowards who confess on scattered radio broadcasts, field generals on their epitaphs. I have my father's eyes and ratchet smile. Mirrors betray me. What anchors me has drifted to the boundary. What a poor murder. He should have died at war, close combat, an instep to the shoulder, then a knee to the chest, or his crown caught in the sight of a symbol rebel scope as the world draws close. Not caught off guard in a drunken brawl, because this is not how the loss of light should come to the world. Thank you. So I'm going to read you this is the card. I'm going to read you the poem at the back. So it's a little gift you can take away. It's called King of Myth. And I think we did it in the workshop, which you came to. All right, so King of Myth. Back when you were taken from our lives, like the Son of God ascending into heaven to another life, policemen on their motorbikes named you King of Myth. We danced to toss grenades, all part of the charade in this fire ritual. In a restless air, we surrendered our weapons, axe heads, shanks, short rope, blades, some poison, and all its animal understanding, now fair game to the enemy with our world in their scope. They came down hills during the blackout, phantoms from a fallen sky with years of practice at soft landings onto roofs in darkness like a spirit slipping into skin. The voice of their guns kept the violence from escaping. But disturbance in the trees can easily be mistaken for wind. Honey, I'm still free. Take a chance on me, as the radio sings. So our editor is in the room, and he can tell you the truth that this poem was the last to go in the book. I shoehorned it in. I don't know how he accepted it. Obviously, I'd become a better writer by then, because it wasn't one of the long edits. But it's one of my favorite poems. I've been struggling with it for about 3 years. It's called Bird in Flames. And all I want you to do is remember the bird. What'd you have to remember? Bird. Aha! I like it. You guys are all right. You can stay. Okay. Bird in Flames. A man in his beard talks to another man after a swig of a dark bottle. His lips leak out a In the first death, I am a bird, darting from an oncoming pickup truck under starlight as I head for the grass. A static quiet. The pickup drives down the road. Two men mention genocide. A third struggles to confess that he has spoken to the tribe and it stirred a conflict. Earlier, the third man was blindfolded, a hand resting at the bottleneck of his throat, a knife at his wrists. Others surrounded him in a circle under a low purple light. The moment was disguised as a get-together, hence the beer, the meats and chapatis, and women's voices rising up over music. The third man's arms are crossed as a deep voice enters the discussion and asks him, truthfully, Bishop, where are the arms? The night has an Indian heat. Silence screws the third man to his seat. He leans into the bishop's ear and rolls up his sleeves and invites him to join him once he has told him where the guns are. The guns. The guns. The bishop replies, I can live without your formalities, without these courtesies. I mean, what meal have you prepared that I have not eaten? The voice kicks his chair out from under him. Back in the pickup, the bodies are not moving. They pass a school, a settlement, a store, up in the hills, but there is no conversation. Notice the bird. The car's headlights are like fireflies, and since the moment has passed, I can tell you there was no bird. But the men were real, and the table with its chair full of food. The only thing missing are the bullets. A second death. I mean, that is how nations die over there. When I say nation, I mean tribe. When I say tribe, I mean people. And when I say over there, I mean here. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you both. I was in sort of thinking about this panel and, of course, reading both of your collections, which are just absolutely amazing collections. And like Shivani did, I encourage you to all skedaddle your way outside to buy the books, get them signed, live with them as long as you can bear to, which is a hard thing to say, as long as you can bear to, because there's some work that sort of holds you for a while, doesn't really sort of let go and kind of stay thinking about them. And I think both of your collections are quite like this. I wanted to talk to you both about territories. And yesterday in your panel, we talked a lot about, you and Jane talked a lot about borders and crossing borders, but I'm thinking of a different kind of territory. I suppose your internal landscape as poets. I remember a writer said to me once that every writer has a sort of territory that they traverse and keep coming back to, and he described it almost like rooting around in a garden for something that you think you have buried there, but you can't quite find it. You know, if you just keep looking, you're always sort of circling those things. And I wonder, if you had to describe it, what do you think would be the territories that you keep sort of coming back to, that the things that keep you up at night, that haunt you, that's always in your work, not just these collections, but always sort of there in the back of your mind that you're trying to work through in your poetry?
For me, I feel it has been interesting to not keep rooting around in the same ground, because I felt that from the first poems in the book, which incidentally would probably be 10 years to this year, I've been kind of mining the same landscape, which at first was something that kind of frustrated me, because I felt, am I writing the same thing over and over, or am I looking for something that I haven't quite found yet? And so I tried to kind of look at it in different ways, be more specific about what I'm looking for. And in a way, it kind of became like mapping a kind of landscape of memory and human narratives very much embedded in a particular landscape. But the challenge has really been not to keep doing it over and over, to know when several poems are doing the same kind of reflection, the same kind of archaeology, and maybe one in particular might be doing it more successfully, or maybe they belong together, or maybe they're all parts of a kind of necessary conversation. But I feel that the book itself kind of brought me full circle in that journey, in that kind of exercise of mapping.
And you said that perhaps maybe you might have several poems and maybe one is doing it quite successfully. Like, I wondered, some of your poems, it's like they have 3 titles, like the 4-in-1s.
Yeah.
It's one poem.
Yeah.
But you sort of look at it, sort of turn the subject matter and look at it from different angles.
Yeah. It was interesting because I didn't write them at the same time at all. It was, in some cases in writing, and the writing really changed in that year after the Holic Avon Prize, where I had the mentorship with Pascal Petit, and she really helped me to kind of look at it in a clearer way, and not so much, I have all this material and I need to go, but ask myself, what am I trying to do, and how am I trying to do it? And the Fawn story, I think, became really pivotal to the whole collection in that way. Like, I'm looking at the same thing. It's the same place, it's the same story, it's the same fawn, but the different, I kind of turn out the different perspectives, and the fawn means different things to different people. Yeah.
Thank you. Nick?
I don't know how my mind works, but what I can let you into my mind a little bit.
Please do.
I don't know how people say this, because maybe people say different things. I'm a writer, and that's a hard thing to accept in this world when the world wants you to be other things. So, but I am not always the writer. So right now I'm just being Nick, but in the space where I'm being a writer, I have to write about something that means something to me. That's the first stimulus. The second stimulus, I want it to make a difference. So now, it could be a big difference or a small difference. It's not about how spectacular it is, but it has to, I'm not writing just for the sake of writing, so it's not an indulgence. Then on the other level of that is, I always relate to myself like a martial artist, and I always relate to it like I'm a white belt, so I'm at the beginning. So I'm always I always assume that as I am writing this poem, there is something I have to learn about writing.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Very much so. So
in my mind, I'm trying to, I mean, we did it in the workshop. I am trying to be the perpetual student. So, so usually there is something something might inspire me to write about it, but then I think, well, if I have to write about this glass, I'm like, what does this glass have to teach me about being a poet? But at the same time, what is it I have to tell you about this glass such that it becomes a poem about a glass, or a poem about, or a play about a glass, or a, whatever. Does that make sense to you? And then I'm looking at how has the glass been represented in the world, and what can I add to it? Because I don't want to give you what you already know about a glass. Does that make sense? And then, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Keep going, you're good. I'll tell you if you stop making sense.
Yeah, and then I have in as far as creativity, and I think, people who know me artistically, so probably Jeremy can attest to this. Once I'm in something, I have an addictive personality, so I'm totally focused. Like you can tell me about something else, I'm really not interested. So if I watch Avengers, I'm thinking, wow, what does Avengers teach me about a glass? If you could be. I'm sorry, I see your partner there, so this is not. But you could be my partner. I'm thinking, hey, what does my partner teach me about a glass? Yo, this is an interview. Hey, what is it? Like but I'm not doing that intentionally. Right. That is just how my mind is. So, but I trick my mind because I don't want to be saying the same thing. So I've recently been on a residency at Wordsworth's house, and I realized a man who was doing this like 250 years ago. We do the same thing. So he uses notebooks. But I write in a notebook here, and then I hide something in another notebook there, and then I hide it in a computer here. And then when I come to sit at the desk, because the writing is the last part of the puzzle. The living and the research is the first part. So when I come to the writing, and I'm like, oh man, I don't even have anything to write about. Oh man. And then I look at the stuff and I'm like, wow, look. Hey, look at this. Oh. And then all of a sudden it seems brand new, and then new things come up in the looking at that stuff. That is the closest I can give you to how I do it. But even now, as I say that, probably the next time it will happen in a new way. But I know that some of those elements are always present in some kind of form.
Thank you. I suppose now that you've sort of said that, I'm wondering how much of this happens in, I don't want to say the editing stage, but how much of this happens in the working stage of a poem? I'm not a poet, but I'm thinking at some point a fragment or an idea or something sort of drops or hits or emerges, and then when you try to work out, okay, where is the poem in this? Is the poem here? Is it there? Does this process you've both kind of described, come almost immediately on the heels of that? Or is this something that comes after when, as you said, you kind of sit down and say, okay, I'm going to make this thing. And then there is that more intentional, more deliberate, more craft that kind of goes into it. I guess I'm trying to work out at what point, as a poet, do you go from, I don't like to use the word inspiration, but the thing that hits and then the poem, that space in between, or is that a really question that you almost don't even know what happens?
I think for me, most of the time, I kind of know when I find the thing, something, and it's usually something in my lived day-to-day experience. Nick was saying the glass, the way the light falls on it, it triggers a memory. What do I have to say, as you were saying, that has not been said before, but something usually triggers it. And the something, for me personally, I have notebooks upon notebooks, pieces of paper folded, notes in my phone, and it's become real all over the place now as a parent. Yeah, as a parent, it's a mess. Sometimes in traffic, in the supermarket. But you need to record it. And I think, if you wait to do it in a kind of orderly,
ideal Zen
ideal and very, lovely, romantic, poetic way in this really nice notebook or something, it doesn't happen. And so we end up with these fragments. But I think for me, the importance has been in just recording it, just writing, just getting it down, and then coming back is a whole different process. But it's in the recognizing the thing that sparks, the thing that there's something there. Yeah.
I always get wary when I hear the word edit. Edit is important, but it's almost like it's the last part of the process, and it's an important part. But like, if I said to you, let's make a cake, and then I took all the separate ingredients of a cake and chucked them into a hot oven and said, right, I'm going to make a cake. Most people try to edit while they're in creation. So you first have to, do you understand that? So don't get me wrong, editing is important. So the hot oven is important, because that's where everything gets tested. Do you have the right salt, the right sugar, whatever you're putting into that cake? Do you have the right ingredients? And if it is, and you give it for the right time, then you'll make the cake. That is editing, and it is a skill unto itself. And that is probably one of the best men I've seen, or people, as editors. And I've learned a lot from editing. And then inspiration, that's another word that kind of scares me, because people think that inspiration is part of the poetic process. A lot of times, I've sat at my desk and literally nothing has come out. Like I have the idea, I've been inspired by something, here's a desk, there's the pen, let's go!
You're like, oh hell.
It's broken. So but that is actually part of the process. Failure is part of I fail more times at my poems than I succeed. I fail constantly. It is painful. Like, for me, writing is painful. But when it works, it is the most beautiful thing that can happen. But you have to be patient in that pain. You have to still read. You still have to whatever, so... and also, one of the best pieces of advice is that Pascal is also great. mentor and just a wise woman. But another thing that Mimi Kavati always said is that you have to wait for the poem to form. So sometimes you're writing stuff and you have all these notes and they are not the poem. Even though it sounds poetic, even though it looks great, it is not the poem. And sometimes when I sat with Jeremy, a lot of the poems that you see and you think, I like that poem. What I gave him initially, I thought was the poem. It wasn't the poem. It was the fragment or the echo or the negative or you know, like when you can tell, oh, it's going to rain because you can smell the air.
Smell it.
That's not the poem. That's not the rain. But you're like, no, but it's the rain. No, that's the smell of the rain. You know, I don't mean to be angry about it. Like, it's just, I'm passionate about his poetry stuff. It means a lot to me. You know, so a lot of times I'm trying to make sure that I'm not closing down the poem, not pretending that this is the poem when it's not the poem, and trying to be, the hardest thing for a poet to be is patient. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, be patient in the creative process before you get to the editing process. That, you know, so, does that make sense? Yes. All right.
Thank you. I'm actually piggybacking on something that you said in an interview. Actually, I think it was on the Poetry School, the How I Did It article for when you were shortlisted for the Forward Prize. And you said it took a while before I could say I was working towards the collection.
Before you say anything, I'm so glad I'm not Trinidadian, because if I knew that I was putting in a book when she was putting in a book, I would have ejected.
It's like, no way.
Oh, no, seriously. I was like, no, I ain't doing it. I ain't doing it.
Yeah, we might never have got to this point at all. Because it actually speaks to that sort of uncertainty. It took a while before I could say I was working towards a collection, because that would mean I was committed to a life as a poet, something I hadn't yet reconciled in my heart. And I'm just wondering about at what point do you say, this is me, this is what I do? What does it mean to be committed to a life as a poet? What does that mean to either of you?
That's impossible. That's a hard question. I do think it's something I go around, you know, I am a poet.
I am a poet.
Yeah. But it's a kind of consistent commitment to, because as you were saying, it's hard, it's painful, but when it works, there's nothing like that. It's beautiful. It's a rush. There's nothing like that. And I think once there's always that kind of terror that it's never going to work like this again. This is my last good poem. There's nothing in me again. But yeah, I think, you know, you have to keep pursuing it. Yeah, but oh gosh, no, that's a hard question to ask a big pregnant lady.
We're coming back to that you're cooking there just now, don't worry.
I've told this story a few times. I want to tell you a mini story than the story. So the mini story is, I just told this story to Marlon James, which sounds very strange to me. Like I was just talking to Marlon James. So I'm just going to get that out of my head. That was the mini story. But there was if you ever have, this is the story I told Marlon James, and it's an important story. So if you read Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, in that he says, the young poet approaches Rilke and asks, how do I become a poet? And many people ask this. I've just had a conversation with a young artist who just asked that, how do I become a poet? And then Rilke's answer to the poet is, you know what you should do? You should go and live your life. And if you live your life and your life was fine, you were never a poet to begin with. You were never a writer. But if you live your life and you can't eat, you can't sleep because you're always thinking about poetry or writing, then remaster your life, rejig it, move everything around to serve the poetry. Yeah? So I've just read this book. I went in on a course. It was a creative course for people doing workshops because I was teaching loads of workshops. We're in a group of 3, just like as we are on the table, and there are about 5 groups of 3, and the group, 2 of the group have to ask one of the group a question. So the question that was asked to me, I remember I've just had Rilke in my book, he's in my bag right now, and the question was asked to me, Nick, what would you do if you couldn't write anymore? And I'm like, oh. I was so arrogant in my answer. Oh. I'd become a filmmaker. I'll become a journalist. Next question. You know, that's how I answered. Like, I was so, no, I said, no, I don't think you heard what we said, Nick. What would you do if you were never, ever allowed to write again? I was like, what? And then it suddenly, like, hit me, like, the truth of what they'd said. And in that moment, I started crying as if I'd lost my wife, my mother, my daughter, my son. I'm seriously, I was crying like you would have thought that something really horrible happened. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't taking writing seriously. I was doing it like it was a gift, like it was something easy, like it was all of these things. And I'm telling you, the person that you saw that day, that person no longer exists. And so when you ask, like, this is not a joke. Like, I'm not doing this like, I mean, I want to make money and I have to make money. I've got responsibility, just like you. I've got a wife and a kid, and 2 kids, actually. I don't know why I lost the other one. But, woo! No, I still love you. But I'm telling you, I kid you not, even if you weren't paying me, You'd
still do it. Mm-hmm.
No, and I'm not saying that to impress you. I am, like, that was the epiphany. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Like this is it. So I don't, like, when I'm writing a poem or when I'm going on a trip to be at Boca, this is not a joke to me. I mean, I'll have fun, I will talk to people, but I am deadly serious when it comes to writing, if that makes sense. You know?
Very much so. I mean, 3 of us, I think we've all had that moment of, I think it goes, I think this is it. I think I could do this. I think I'm kind of all right at this. Until it sort of hits in a wave that this is what I do. Mm. This is what I do. I do other things, perhaps. I live, I wine plenty, drink plenty, you hang out with people, you have a job, you whatever, but this is the core thing that I do. You know, it's an interesting place to kind of come to that sort of realization. You mentioned just now about this realization happened to you in a sort of a workshop, and both of you have been parts of writing communities. Certainly I know for Danielle, and I've seen it in your bio also, Cave Canem. You talk about your experience at Malika's Kitchen. You've been in Cropper Workshop. Bocas has been a big part of your career, and I wondered if you would both speak to, one, the importance of community as a writer, because we've sort of been talking about the slightly solitary parts of it, the turning of the glass, but how important community is for you as a poet, and also writers that you may find yourself, other poets or fiction writers or essayists that you may find your work in conversation with, if not deliberately, that somehow there's somebody that you're sort of almost like not your pacemaker, not a person you're competing with or a person, anything like that, but another poet or writer that you feel that you're in conversation with or in dialogue with. So one, about your communities and how important that's been, and if there's that person for you. Not an editor, but a fellow artist.
Bocas, I feel it's funny because I was just reminiscing yesterday on the kind of year-by-year progression through Bocas and the different events and from the new talent showcase and all that. And I think, yeah, writing can be really solitary. It can be, frustrating. It can, it can be tremendously rewarding. But sometimes you kind of have those, like, what am I really doing moments. What going to happen to these poems? They're just kind of stacking up, and you feel like you write in a vacuum, and that sense of community has been really important. And sometimes in those conversations, in those workshops, you see things that you would have never seen. You make connections you would have never made, not just with other people, but ideas. Realizations that you're not just working in an empty space, but you're working in connection with other people's work in a bigger body, and in terms of other poets whose work I feel, Shivani and I are really good friends. Shivani's dying right now.
Shivani!
But since Cropper 2009, 2010, Shivani and Andre Bagu, Desiree Sibaran, and so many others, Colin Robinson, we've all, kept in touch and felt like we've been writing kind of alongside each other. And with Shivani, it's been extremely valuable to have someone to message or call and be like, I don't know what I'm doing, like, why I'm doing this? It's hard. I'm going to lie down. And it's seeing, her book being published and kind of being on the journey alongside her has been really intense experience, and the whole process of growth and growth as part of a community and not just this kind of solitary, well, I'm doing this, but I'm not too sure what I'm doing. It's been extremely, extremely valuable.
Thank you.
Community is 100% essential, especially as writers of color. A lot of times they're gatekeepers who are keeping us out. So, what else? You need a buddy. What you're trying to is a buddy. So it's like you look in most sports, they have that. They have the person you work with, you spar with, like a boxer has a sparring partner, or you have a coach. You need all of those elements because, I mean, like I said, I say to you again, it's like a martial art. You have you said it took about 10 years to write the book. Part of that is getting good enough to write the book. You can have the idea of a poem. So that last poem the last poem I read, one of the first poems I read to you, the idea was strong, but I didn't have the skill to write the poem. But in my communities, the things I had to read, because reading is part of writing. The two are symbiotic, you have to engage. And also the other thing is that a lot of times we're working on our craft, but we don't regret that there's also a writing industry. And if you're not keeping up with the industry, by the time you're ready to write or finish the book, you're not ready to be in the industry. And so you need a community to process and have you ready. So for example, these communities, you're talking about Carvey Conham, which I think you're going to be talking to Dinez and Nicole. They're a big part of my life. Like a lot of the poems that you like came from when I was in Carvey Conham in a writer's retreat, writing a poem every day with their encouragement. Just being in a room. Imagine being in a room like this. In most spaces I go to, I am one writer and of color and everyone else is white. Now imagine going to a place where I am in a space where everyone is black and we're all just writing. It's a different speed. It's a different energy. It's a different kind of encouragement. Nobody has to say anything. I just need to write. So community is important. Carvey Conham to me was very important. Malika's Kitchen, Complete Works. And I try and help communities as well. So.
Thank you very much. On that note, if there are any questions, all right, let's go.
Danielle, we've talked a lot about how intense and often shitty it is when work is coming that is difficult and is a lot to process, and you feel like you'd rather be at Maracas or winding down the place than write it. But what about those times when the writing does not come? Like, have you found a way to be happy when work is not flowing, when poems are not coming? I mean, and your life is, I guess, like anyone's life, rich and full, and we know the things you have publicly, and we don't know the things you have privately, and that's as it should be. But what about happiness in a space where the poems are not ready to show themselves?
It has gotten easier. There was a time when I felt like an intense pressure to have the book be ready. And it's as you were saying, sometimes you are not ready to go through, right? Yeah, or to go through the whole process of publication and all that. But that kind of desire, like you want it to be ready so bad, you want it to be over with, you want to see the thing to fruition. And I felt that when I kind of let go of that, it became easier because that kind of will, that kind of force in it, it was not working. And that, as kind of gets back to your question, came from a space of just living and carving out, excuse me, carving out space for the writing, of course, and reading and all that, and remaining committed. And of course, you can't, there's no way you're going to ignore the poetry. There's no way, right? But it has become, and well, for obvious reasons, it's increasingly more important to me that I let it happen. I don't think about it all the time. I cannot try to live the poetry, and it probably makes no sense, but just kind of have it playing softly in the background. Yes. And when it's ready, it happens, which is a kind of fine line to walk, because then it might never happen unless you make the time and the space for it. But as in all things, a balance. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything to that, or maybe if there's another question? Hi. There are two more. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My question is for Nick. As an English literature teacher at a high school level, one of my biggest challenges is having students who say they don't like poetry and they have a hard time to understand poetry. Would you recommend any strategies I could use to help my students develop an appreciation for poetry?
Yeah, bring me to your workshop. No, seriously. Ask them what they read, because a lot of times what they perceive poetry to be and what it is are two different things. So, and also you got to expose them to a wider readership of poetry. Like, sometimes, and what you can do is you can take, for example, if you take Dennis Smith, some of his poetry, maybe Terence Hayes, or whoever you choose, and just delineate it. Just have it like a paragraph and just have them read it, or just read them some stuff and talk to them. And then they'll be surprised, I really like that. And then when you actually say to them, actually, that was poetry. Because what they think it is this rhyming thing. Rhyming is an ingredient in poetry. I don't use salt all the time in everything. If I put loads of salt in my food...
Yeah, high blood pressure.
Yeah, but people they rhyme in every poem. So they think that is an ingredient of poetry. I don't put that ingredient in everything. I don't put salt in my cake. I don't put salt in my ice cream. So if I'm making you food, if poetry is food, their palate is not healthy. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So and also you've got to ask yourself as a teacher, am I fearful of poetry? Because your fears of poetry can come across in their fears of poetry. So is your readership narrow? So I have to read wider beyond what I like. A lot of what I read, I don't like everything I read. I don't read everything from just a certain bunch. I don't just read American poets. I read Persian poets. I read, read all over and also read in the past and, like that, if that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. All right?
Hi, good day. Okay, this is a question for all three of you. As being a writer myself, how do you guys combat writer's block?
Can I answer that one?
Yeah, because I'll just say rum, and that's probably not the best answer.
And most of my inspiration actually comes from pain. So how do you find inspiration besides pain?
Can I answer it? All right, so two things. I'm going to give you a metaphor. So if you are a farmer and we call you writing poetry the harvest, the harvest takes time. You first have to, find the seed, plant the seed, grow the seed. When you're growing the seed, you have to water the seed. You have to make sure the right temperature. So all those things, a lot of times in our writing process, many of those elements are missing. But what we're looking at is, how come there's no harvest? Well, you didn't plant no seed. The seed is the reading. If you're not reading, you'll never get a harvest. There is no harvest. So a lot of time that lacking is not only that, you're reading badly. If you read bad books, you're going to write bad poetry. You read good books, you're going to write good poetry. Now, you're lucky you're at a book festival. Buy their books. You know what I mean? That makes common sense. So that's number one. And then you don't only have one emotion. It's just like you don't have one. If I go into your kitchen at your house, You don't just have one seasoning. You have many. So you can't be just going, my pain, my pain, my pain. You know, that's like the salt. Where's the paprika? Oh, you know, like use all the seasoning, you know? So notice yourself, and I make a joke of it, but notice yourself when you're happy. Notice yourself when you're bored. Because the poet's superpower is what they notice in the world, not just consider that only when you're down. The reason why we write when we're down is because that's the only time we're willing to notice ourselves. Look how sad I am, as opposed to, hey man, look at those people over happy. Like, let me notice that. What does it look like when people are in love? Like I just saw you and your partner. These two are in love, yo. Yeah, but it's not about my sadness. I'm like, oh man, why are they in love? You know, like that, you know, so. I don't know if that was helpful, but you know.
I would love to take another question. I'm getting the sign that's telling me 5 minutes. Does that mean 5 minutes as in one more question, or 5 minutes as in wrap up? If there's one more question, I'll love to take it. All right. Yes, or maybe you can both read 2 really short ones. Mm-hmm. Where your book? Look your book down. Mm-hmm.
I'll read this poem here, and then the title poem. So this is called Resurrection Man. Somewhere west of our sacred sites, the ghost of your former self is rising from captivity. Your student friend, the one that saw you last, swears she left you alive in the taxi. Even after my 2-fisted punches, she denies being the one who gave the signal for dark men to change their shapes in the night. As you knelt blindfolded, I wanted to believe she had no part in the shaving of your hair and pubic mound in front of onlookers, rebels, kneading your breasts like posho in their palms, begging in turn for your body, bleached by the Jeep's headlights. Once broken, you were dragged by the arms across the grass onto the unpaved taxiway of Aurora Airport. Then one yelled, "Burn her, the witch." Their echoes agreed. One lit a match, another peeled the blindfold, the rest poured gin on your face. I know you saw me in the hollow of a tree. I wanted to run to you, but their bullets would have easily caught up with me. I stood firm, learning to hide myself in the dark. A man must have 2 faces, one he can live with and one he can die with. The second face is mine.
Thank you.
A poem on the world's last night. It is late now, and I am tired of the same streets and the same strangers, mute as bottles. I am tired of walking home with a throat full of noise and glass, my body clutched, trembling, and closed. I am weary of the pinned smile and bound breasts, the silent woman with eyes like rainstorms, nursing buttoned-up hurricane hearts. It is late, and I am tired of sweeping brimstone beneath the bed, pretending fires don't start in quiet rooms. So if this is what remains of the world's last night, who will stop me from burning down my burglar-proof bones, from breaking the windows and falling headfirst into the moon's blue end?
Thank you so much. Folks, just one last round of applause for these 2 amazing poets. Thank you so much. Next up, we've got right in here Nalo Hopkinson and Marlon James talking with Karen Lord. So, I mean, like, go outside and get your book signed, but, like, come back quick. Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.